Heather Reynolds, and I have the privilege of serving as CEO of Catholic Charities Fort Worth. We are so thankful that you have chosen to spend your night with us this evening. Can you imagine being so poor that you break into an abandoned home, tear up the carpet on the floor so your children will have a blanket to keep you warm at night? Or listening to your little girl gasping to breathe at night while she tries to sleep because you can't afford to buy her asthma medication. Or listening to your little boy crying, hunched over in pain while grabbing his stomach because he is hungry and you don't have the money to feed him. For the people who walk through our doors, they don't imagine much. This is their reality. Poverty robs people of their joy. Poverty robs people of their hope. Poverty robs people of their ability to be their best, to do what God created them and intends them to do. Our vision at Catholic Charities is simple yet bold: to end poverty one family at a time, to end this economic disaster, to end this moral wrong. Tonight, we hope to educate and transform you. We hope to inspire and engage you. This fight against poverty is not something that can be won by one individual, one organization, one company. The fight against poverty will only be won if all of us, as people of goodwill, work together to say enough is enough. This is an important fight, and it is paramount that we help transform the way our country is talking about poverty and recommit to being ambassadors and advocates for change. As the saying goes, when you know better, you do better. We have an exceptional evening ahead of us. You will hear from a national expert in the field of poverty, Robert Doar, and our hometown experts who have won the fight against poverty, several of our Catholic Charities clients. At this time, I would love to introduce you to Robert Doar. Robert is a great friend to Catholic Charities Fort Worth. He is smart, he is compassionate, and he is thoughtful. Robert is a Morgridge Fellow in Poverty Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. There he studies and evaluates how free enterprise and approved program policies and programs reduce poverty for vulnerable Americans. Specifically, he focuses on employment, health, education, and community participation of low-income Americans and their children. Before joining AEI, Robert was commissioner of New York City Human Resource Administration, where he administered 12 public assistance programs for the largest social service agency of the United States. Prior to joining the Bloomberg administration, Robert was New York State Commissioner of Social Services, where he helped to make New York a model for the implementation of welfare reform. Since joining AEI, he has written for the Wall Street Journal, the National Review, and Real Clear Markets. Robert has visited us several times in Fort Worth, invited us to present with him in DC, provides ongoing excellent feedback for our poverty-ending work. His expertise in intensive care on the topic of poverty has made this local Catholic charity so much better. Please join me in giving a warm Fort Worth welcome to Robert Doar.
Thank you very much, Heather. I want to first say thank you to Heather and to all of her staff at Catholic Charities Fort Worth. I spent all of today, and this is my second visit here. And I want you to know that you really have an outstanding leader and an outstanding program in Fort Worth led by Heather. And I really, really thank you for the great work that you do. And I also want to thank all of you for being here, because this is a difficult issue and a hard issue, and one in which it takes participation and engagement. And I'm very appreciative that you took the time to come and listen. So I'm full of thanks. But I also have a little problem and a little quibble. And that is that I saw when we began up on the screen and in the form that you were handed out, something that said the truth about poverty. And I want you to know there are lots of truths about poverty, and I don't know anywhere close to all of them. And, as Heather said, I come from the East. I lived for 18 years in New York, where I worked in anti-poverty programs at both the state and the city, and now I'm in AEI working in Washington. And I have a brother who is in the Midwest. He runs a machine tool company, and he's been to some of these events where I speak, and he gave me one piece of advice. He said, well, Robert, you know, out here in the Midwest, we'll listen to you say, that's how we did it in New York once. And maybe we'll hear it a second time. But please, no more than 3. No more of that. So I want you to know that I'm here as much in my capacity as a researcher, an evaluator, and a listener, and a learner, as I am as someone who has learned anything in my career. And so I hope you'll take my remarks today in that spirit. I've learned a lot already today. I know we're going to learn more with our guests later this evening, and I hope we learn something in the conversation and the dialogue. So with that, sorry, Heather, a little quibble about the truth about poverty. I'll start us off. Now, it is true that I'm really happy to be out of D.C. Politics in America and what's happening in the presidential campaign is a little depressing if you're around it and that's all you think about. And it's very good to get away from all of that. And over the past couple of years, I have been in Cleveland and Cincinnati and up in Maine with the Commission, and in El Paso and in Little Rock, all across our country. And often and always, I am with organizations like Catholic Charities of Fort Worth, who are doing great things to help struggling Americans. And it's a really inspiring aspect of my career right now, because it is true. We live in a generous country. We live in a country filled with people who want to help and who do help and provide a great deal of assistance to people in need in all kinds of venues, in not-for-profits, in faith-based organizations, in schools, in charter schools, and in government agencies. But one of the things that is consistent that I have found in these visits as I've gone around the country, is that they all look with it ranges from befuddlement and concern and worry to anger and disappointment and real outrage about what it is our large federal programs are doing when it comes to poverty. The amount of money that we spend, the bureaucracies that have been created, the programs that have been created that don't seem to be working on the same plane, rowing the same oars in the same direction at these programs that are trying so hard to help struggling Americans. And that's really what I consider very much part of my job, is how can we get all of these efforts and initiatives that are trying so hard to work better together so that we can be more successful than we have been. And I have to tell you, that is not much of a surprise for me, because a little bit about my background. My father had worked in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department in Washington in the 1960s. And then he was asked to go to Brooklyn to run an anti-poverty program. Civil rights is an issue, anti-poverty is a different issue, but they are related. And he began a sort of new career in a small, community-based, business-sponsored, focus on self-reliance, neighborhood building program in the middle of Brooklyn, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, one of our country's largest and most troubled slums at that time. And he worked hard and he tried hard, and that little program did some good things. It helped some people on some blocks in some neighborhoods get jobs and move up and escape poverty. But at the very same time that he was doing that work, our federal programs were providing assistance and welfare benefits with no expectation of personal responsibility, no expectation of work. And despite my father and his team's efforts, so much of what they were doing was undone or undermined or prevented from being successful by what I think of as misguided policies. So what I think of my work at AEI in Washington is to do what I can to try to get these large federal programs working better and more in concert with where the really great work is happening at the community level. And also, by the way, to talk to the community level organizations about how they can improve. Because it's not just true that if you're local in your community and you're not-for-profit, you're better, or you're immune from not being afraid to be held accountable. One of the great things about Catholic Charities Fort Worth is they want to be held accountable. They want to be measured. They want to be evaluated on the impact they have in changing people's lives. That's so important, and it's not always the case in important community-based organizations. So let's take a look at sort of where we are. I'm going to now show you a few charts about sort of what the status of poverty in America is, and give you some broad, big numbers, and then I'll talk about how I think we can do better, and then we'll have people that really can give you a much more important perspective join me on the stage, and then we'll open it up for questions. So this is the official poverty rate, 1990 to 2014. And as you can see, it peaked at about 15% for all Americans, and then it dropped really dramatically in the late 90s to a bottom in 2000. African American child poverty, for instance, reached its all-time low in 2000. It really was a pretty significant combination of a lot of factors, but led to real progress. We had a stronger economy. We had a transforming welfare program that was putting much greater emphasis on work. And we had, I think, the appropriate balance in our large programs that rewarded work or made work pay. So we reached a bottom in 2000. And then as the 2000s began, things started to edge back in the wrong direction. And then during the big recession in 2007, 2008, it really went up. And now, really 5-6 years after the end of that recession, we're still at elevated levels. So we're not doing so well. The poverty rates in the United States are elevated from where they were. I don't know that 11% is good either, but we can do better. It's just not true that these numbers don't move. They do move, and public policy does make a difference. It's a similar line for child poverty. Again, big drop in the late 90s, reaching a low of 16%, and now back up to like 23, 24%, 22%, and still staying high even 5 years into the end of a recession. So troubling. Now, the one thing about these numbers that needs to be pointed out is that this is the official poverty measure, and it has a lot of flaws in it. And its biggest flaw is that it doesn't count when it looks at the resources available to households who are being counted as being in poverty. It doesn't count many of the major transfer payments and assistance that is provided by government. So this doesn't count food stamp benefits, which is now about $70 billion a year for people in need. It doesn't count earned income tax credit, which is similarly sized. It doesn't count the value of public health insurance. So you can, and this is no small, this is important, but it's not, it shouldn't make you feel completely satisfied. You can be assured that the material well-being of Americans who are poor is better off than it used to be. That because we have these transfer programs, people have a material well-being that's better off than it used to be, and better off than these numbers would show. They have resources that are greater than these numbers show. But they're not working. And so the extent to which these measures are accurate is what are people earning on their own? What are they able to do with their own livelihood, their own initiative, their own work, their own wages? And there, as I say, we had progress, and now we've gone backwards. And this is the city of Fort Worth, more particular, and it only goes back to 2005, so you don't see the changes that happened in the 90s, but those did happen nationally and in really every major community. Here, basically flat, a little bit up, both for poverty overall and child poverty. This is the chart that indicates, this was done by Christopher Jenks, who's a very prominent Harvard scholar on poverty issues, and he wrote an article for the New York Review of Books on the war on poverty, was it lost? And this reflects, as you see, he starts with the official percent poor in 1964, Then he does the official percent poor in 2013, and then he subtracts out the effect of various transfer programs that lower the poverty rate, and then he also does an inflation adjustment that more accurately reflects what's happened in inflation. And again, so you do see that the percentage of people who, by their material well-being, are valued as poor is lower than it was. But that doesn't mean that they really are independent or are they earning their own success. So this gives you a little reassurance, and this is by folks that are concerned about poverty and a willingness to be honest about what the numbers really mean. Race gaps, as you'll see, this is Americans, African Americans and Hispanics have higher poverty rates. Whites are lower, but trending up in the last few years. And then we have a major issue in any evaluation of poverty is family structure. So the top line is the single mother families, and you see the extent to which poverty rates in those families are significantly elevated from married coupled families. And I'm going to return to that issue in a little while. But it is a significant correlation to poverty and a significant contributor to the difficulties that we face in helping people move up. This is an important statistic that everyone in Washington is paying a lot of attention to. This is male labor force participation, and it has dropped really quite dramatically from 1970. So in 1970, 96% of males 25 to 54 were working, and now we're down to 90%. But that's a pretty significant drop and problematic and contributing to some issues. And it's in all races, Hispanics, blacks, and whites. A little different on female labor force participation. They're rising, but you see in the 2000 period, it's tailed off. Labor force participation and poverty are very much related. Only 3% of everybody who works full-time, full year is poor. So work and poverty are very much related, and a key ingredient to helping people move up and out of poverty is to get them into work. And then this is the share of non-marital births. It's particularly high for African Americans, although flat of recent period. Hispanics it's grown, but it's also grown quite dramatically for whites. An interesting fact about non-marital births, more children are born to white single-parent moms than black single-parent moms every year. The rate is higher for blacks and Hispanics, but the actual number is higher for whites. But one piece of good news, teen pregnancy lines, and again, I'm showing you a lot of graphs, and I'm going to stop in a minute, I promise, is just really dropped dramatically. So we have made progress in reducing the number of teenagers that are getting pregnant. So as Heather said, I went to work partly motivated and inspired by what I'd seen happen in my father's career in New York State government in 1995. And it was, I want to confess, I know I'm in Texas, but I want to get this out right away. I'm a bureaucrat, okay? I worked in government. And so my perspective is informed by that and maybe be undermined by that. But I went to work for the Governor Pataki when he was elected, and I had an advantage because one of the ironies is that when Republicans are in charge, the line for jobs in social services is very short. So I was able to move very quickly and get a lot of responsibility when I was there. And then I worked for 11 years for him and became commissioner of the agency for the last 4 years of his governorship. And then I went and spent 7 years in New York City working again in running the large government assistance programs. Now, we funded not-for-profits. We partnered with community-based organizations. We depended on them. I was telling the guys at Catholic Charities a story today, famous story in New York. This is very much a New York story. I know I told you I wouldn't do this, but I do like this story. Mayor Koch and Cardinal O'Connor were great friends. Cardinal O'Connor was a really great leader in the Catholic Church, and he was the cardinal in New York for many years. And they were great friends, and they'd worked on many things together. and they were appearing at a press conference. And Cardinal O'Connor was here, and Mayor Koch was here, and there apparently had been some issue with regard to a new rule on what government was going to require all recipients of government funding, all entities that provided, that took money from government, needed to comply with. And I'm not going to say what the rule was because I don't know, I can't remember. But it was some new, government rule. And a reporter was standing there, and Cardinal O'Connor, Catholic Charities and the Archdiocese, provided an enormous amount of assistance to New Yorkers in all kinds of ways, in children, senior citizens, young families. The city depended on the work of the Archdiocese and Catholic Charities. And one of the reporters said, Cardinal O'Connor, there's this new rule, and the city says that if you don't comply with it, you're not going to get any more funding, and you won't be able to, fund your programs. And so what are you going to do about it? And Cardinal O'Connor looked out, and he looked at Koch, he looked at the audience, and he said, well, then we won't provide the services anymore, because we have certain principles, and we're going to stick with them. And Mayor Koch, to his credit, knowing how important and how much he relied on the work of the Archdiocese, turned to the Cardinal and said, well, then we're not going to have that rule anymore. Because I need you, and I need your help, and that's the end of that. And it was one of the great stories of, bureaucrats love that story because somebody made a decision. And so, but anyway, but in any case, I worked in state and then city government in all of the capacities. And so what I'm going to talk to you about are the things that I think are most successful in being, in helping people move up and out of poverty. So the number one thing I've got up there, it says work expectations. It's really more than work expectations. It's work requirements. If people are coming in and seeking assistance, the agency or the entity providing that assistance, especially if it's a government entity, needs to say to people in need who they're going to provide assistance to, we need something from you as well. And if you're able-bodied, and if you're not a senior citizen and you're not a child, we need you to move into the labor market rapidly. And the idea that we could provide assistance as an entitlement with no personal responsibility requirement just doesn't work. People then stay in poverty and they don't move up and they don't get into the labor market. And they have capabilities and they can work. And if you but if you send a message that that's not part of the deal, then you won't get the kind of response that you need. So I'm a strong believer in work expectations or work requirements in providing assistance. It's a reciprocal relationship. It recognizes what people in our business know, and that is that an agency or provider of assistance, Catholic Charities, can't do it alone. We need the person we're trying to help to recognize they have a role too. And a work expectation or work requirement makes that clear. Now, I should also point out it doesn't have to be right into a job, but it should be something that's like a job. It should have the schedule, the rigor, the discipline that we as a society expect adults to perform. Particularly if that you get up, you go someplace, you participate in some activity, attendance is taken, and if you don't comply, a consequence will occur. So I was the Commissioner of Welfare in New York City, and while I believe firmly that the agency that I ran provided more assistance to more New Yorkers than any other entity in the city, and I'm talking about a tremendous amount of assistance, we also enforce this requirement more than anybody else. So we sanction people and we reduce benefits. So work expectations for people that can work need to be part of what we do. But we also need to reward, need to provide that kind of assistance that can make work go further. Sometimes wages aren't enough to support a family. Sometimes people need health insurance. Sometimes they need a little help with their food assistance or their ability to afford food at the market. So I am a supporter and a believer in rewards for work and making work pay. And that sometimes means providing a tax credit benefit. Right now, all of you should know, we're coming into the EITC refund period where millions of low-income Americans get a refund that's tied to the fact that they worked some last year. I think that's important, and I support that. The third is, I often say we need to require work, we need to reward work, and we need to talk about family. It's just a fact that children do better and are more likely to succeed if they are raised in households with two married parents. That the benefit of two married parents is tremendous. Fathers are really needed, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about that, because we're going to do lots of things that mitigate the absence of a second parent. But that means we shouldn't say at the same time, we would have a little wind at our back, it would be easier, we'd be more successful in reducing poverty if we could have stronger families. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I was one of the co-chairs of a combined bipartisan AEI, which is kind of right of center, Brookings is left of center, report where we got left and right to agree to this proposition, that we ought to be talking about the importance of two parents in raising children. It's something very important and very essential. Just to give you, right now in America, 43% of all children born in the bottom decile of the income spectrum will remain in the bottom decile when they become adults. So the upward mobility is limited for people in the bottom. But if you control for two-parent families with the same income, and so you're comparing children raised in poor two-parent families, their ability to move up, they actually have, according to the studies, a greater likelihood of reaching the top decile than they do of remaining in the bottom. So it's a significant difference in outcomes. We also need to, while we talk about that, we also need to have more effective programs for struggling men. One of the things about welfare in the United States over the last 40 years is that it's been structured around, appropriately, but around households with children in them, and it's often meant households with single-parent children in them, who is often a mom. Guys are kind of left out of that dynamic. They don't get a strong welfare program pushing them into work. They don't get work supports that make work pay. They're not eligible for the earned income tax credit in any way, generous a way. And guys are falling behind. Boys are more likely to suffer, have the consequences of being raised without a father in the household are more serious for boys than they are for girls. We need to be targeting our attention to struggling men in getting them into work, providing opportunity, addressing their needs, and also providing structure so that they can advance. And then finally, people in social services like to forget or like to pretend that the economy doesn't matter or tax policy isn't important. But the fact of the matter is that if the economy is growing and producing jobs of variety of benefits, a variety of kinds, low-skilled jobs, high-skilled jobs, medium-skilled jobs, then our efforts to reduce poverty are just much stronger. That period in the 1990s where we had success, we had strong growth, we had welfare programs that required work, and we had programs that rewarded work in the right balance, so we made progress. But it took all three. So we need pro-growth policies. People in our business, in social services, often like to not participate in discussions about what we need to do to reduce regulations or make employers more likely to hire people because they worry that it'll defray resources or it's not their issue, or maybe it'll be a tax cut, and God forbid tax cuts may produce revenues and we won't have the revenues to pay for the programs we run. That is very short-sighted, because if you have a growing economy, the life of the anti-poverty fighter is much enhanced. So require work, reward work, talk about families, focus on struggling men, and promote strong growth in economics. All very important for success. Now, I'm going to now finish with only two other points, and then I think we'll bring up our experts and have a little discussion. I'd like to get to that. I'll just make sure what other slides I got. Yeah, well, the AEI is a think tank. We're providing. I encourage you to go to our website. We have a whole poverty study that focuses on homelessness. We have someone who focuses on work. We have someone who focuses on early childhood development. We've recruited a lot of people to participate in the discussion. We've testified before Congress. We've written books and studies. We've produced a lot of material, which I'm proud of, and none of which really is, a very small amount of it is by me. So we're engaged in the debate in an effective and honest way. And it is true in America that sometimes the debate from maybe what you might call the right of center or more conservative perspective when it comes to poverty isn't very strongly represented. And that's our fault. And the fact of the matter is we need to be in that discussion. We need to be at events like this. We need to be talking about poverty because if we don't, then the whole game will be left to a different perspective, which may not be successful. That's one. Two, we're letting our fellow citizens down. And three, Americans want us to be in that debate. They want to support people who are not only concerned with the cutting taxes for the higher up income levels. So we're engaged in the debate in a significant way. What I want to finish with is just to say that I focused a little bit about safety net programs and poverty numbers and my theories. But when it gets right down to it in American public policy, you end up talking about large federal programs. And so I'm going to have to do a little bit of that. And it's going to sound very wonky, but I want to put a little meat on the bones because these discussions are going on now in Washington. And the first thing I want to say is that, recommend and also say, is that this report we wrote with Brookings, that was this bipartisan consensus plan, we came to a realization that there are three big spheres in this work where we need to be focused in all three. One is family, one is employment, and one is schools. I haven't talked a lot about schools. It's not my particular expertise, but I want you to know that I recognize, and we recognized, that those who say we'll solve all this with better schools, well, that's not really right. And those who say we'll solve this better with better labor market or better jobs or better economics, that's not really right. And those who say it's all about family and only about family, that's not right either. We need all three. All three are important, and we need to make progress in all three. And there are ideas where we can make progress in all three. Now, in the realm of the large federal programs, the big ones, and they need reform. They need changes. They need adjustments so that we can get back to where we were in 2000. And so the first, and you'll see this discussion if you follow this closely, the first is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps. It's a good program. It provides a lot of assistance to people who are in need of food assistance. It's grown dramatically. It's now up to about 44 million Americans are receiving food stamps. It grew during the recession, and it has stayed high. And it's grown among workers, but it's also grown among non-workers. So the degree to which there are a lot of people on food stamp benefits who aren't exposed to that work requirement or that work expectation is a real problem. So one area we need to change. We need to change that large, big federal program that touches millions and millions of Americans and make it more focused on work. The Earned Income Tax Credit, equally large, $70 billion program, rewards work by paying people a tax credit or fundable tax credit at the end of the year who have filed a tax return that showed that they worked up to a certain level. It's all good. That's a good thing, rewarding work. But it has a terrible error rate, which undermines its credibility with taxpayers and with Americans. The error rate is about 20%. We can't have a program that fights poverty or tries to help people in need that has an error rate of that size. So we need to fix that. Another sort of obscure program, child support enforcement, has really been changed in the last 10 years in the United States. Not so much in Texas, where I think the program has not been altered as much, but across the country, the focus on that other parent's responsibility. You know, I've talked about helping. I want to help. I want to assist. I want to provide jobs and opportunity, but I also want to hold parents not in the household accountable. We're not doing that as well as parent households who had a child support order has dropped from 58% to about 47% in the last 10 years. That is a significant letting down and an undermining of an important success rate. So we need to do better there. As I mentioned before, the economy matters, and sometimes that comes into play when politicians and congressmen talk about tax policy. So to the extent that we can make adjustments so that we can get business to be more willing and more eager and more anxious to hire and employ and grow, that's good in fighting poverty. So I always feel it's important to mention that as well. And then lastly, I mentioned before when I began, and again, I'm sorry that I'm so wonky and so bureaucratic, but I mentioned before when I began, it's $800 billion in federal spending annually to help low-income Americans, not working as successfully with wonderful organizations at the local level, but also doing a lot of good and certainly relieving material hardship. And so I'm not, the programs are what they are, and I'd like to make them better. But I want to remind everybody, but that $800 billion, $400 billion, or more than half, is for Medicaid, which is America's health insurance and health care program for the poor. So when we talk about, or when conservatives talk about this big investment, this big expenditure, we need to be cognizant of the fact that a big chunk of that is not really going to households who are in poverty. It's going to health insurance plans, for managed care plans, it's going to providers, it's going to the healthcare world. Maybe good, maybe not good, but it's not as if it's going into the hands or the resources in which people can live on households. So I'm a believer in public health insurance. I think it's important. I'm a believer in providing people with access to health care who are poor, but it is taking up every spare dollar we have. When I was the commissioner in New York State, and I would go testify before, and this is certainly true in Texas, and I would go testify before the powers that be on particular issues. If I was talking about child care or food assistance benefits or domestic violence programs or programs for HIV/AIDS, it would be me and a few scruffy advocates fighting to see what we could get from the legislature in assistance. But if I was talking about Medicaid, it was me and some of the most powerful interests in the state because the investment and the dollars were so great. And I have some concern that if we don't get our costs in healthcare under control, we're not going to be able to find anything left to invest in struggling families and people. So that's where I am. I think we made progress. It is not true to say that we fought a war on poverty and we lost. We have made progress for Americans, but we've done better than we're doing now. We need to get back to a set of policies that are more in concert with local initiatives and are pushing themes that around employment, require work, reward work, talk about families, help struggling young men, and promote a strong economy. To me, those are the keys. And now we're going to find out that the most important key of all, and it really is the extent to which people, it's not the only thing you need, but it is an essential first ingredient. And that is that people who are struggling recognize their role in their lives. That's not enough. You can have that and still not succeed in helping people escape poverty. But without that, it's much harder. So I'd like to invite our next three experts to come up. Okay? We have three, is it fair to say, participants in Catholic Charities Fort Worth programs? Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you can't have a program or a discussion of these issues without that's really full and comprehensive, unless we talk to people who have lived it and been there and know the issue face to face, which I believe that's the case with the three of you. I want to thank you for being here and being willing to share your perspective. And so we have, starting on my right, Mandy Hayes, and then Danae Freeman and David Rosenheim. And what we're going to do is they're going to first give a little bit about their background and their story, and then we're going to have a little discussion, and then we're going to ask for a dialogue and discussion with the audience. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so Mandy, tell us a little bit about your story.
So my name's Mandy. I am 40 years old. I was one of 4 children raised by a single mother She worked as a Head Start teacher for 15 years and still was on welfare the whole time. I came here to Fort Worth for a better job opportunity in Plano. Didn't realize that Fort Worth is not next to Plano. And 3 months.
Big distances out here in Texas.
Big distance. 3 months without a job. When I finally did get a job, is about a month later, I lost my car. Because if you don't pay for it, they take it away. I had to live in a hotel, walked 2 miles to work, 2 miles home. It took a toll on my feet, and the doctor said I couldn't walk anymore. So it was cab rides until I saw a Catholic Charities bus. Because of that bus, I was able to, of course, avoid the cab, save up money to get a car again, continue working. I've now had a couple promotions. I'm back to school, going for my bachelor's, and it's a miracle.
Transportation.
Transportation.
Danae?
Yes. My name is Danae Freeman. I'm 21 years old. I'm an only child. I grew up just with my mother. And growing up, my whole entire life, all I saw was struggle. And it got to the point where it became so normal to me that I didn't even realize that I was living, or my family was living beneath our means. Growing up, I remember the days where we didn't have a refrigerator and having to go to the food bank just to get food and having our water shut off for about a month and having to go to food bank, oh, I already said food bank, sorry, and being on food stamps. And, you know, once you lived through that for like so many years of your life, you kind of get to the point where not only are you tired and fed up of living that cycle, but you have to say enough is enough. And there's so much more to life than what I was seeing and what I was enduring. So I ended up attending TCC, the Trinity River campus in downtown, in 2013, and that's how I got affiliated with the Catholic Charities program. They helped me with a lot of assistance, not only inside of school, but outside of school as well. And for instance, like bill pay assistance and just staying on the right track in order to focus on my dreams and goals in school. One of the major issues that I had was trying to find a job outside of high school. With not having a car, transportation was kind of a barrier that was in the way for me to find work. And because of that reason, that's why I tended to focus more of my time and energy on school, since at that time, finding a job just wasn't readily available. Catholic Charities did help me find a job, and within February of 2015, I started to work part-time while also going to school. And now I am working on my associations of the arts, and then next year transferring over to UNT to work on my degree.
That's terrific. Congratulations. David?
My name is David Rosenheim, and I am a blessed man. I'm blessed because my wife of 24 years is here with me. I'm blessed because my daughter Allison is here with me, and my sons Anthony and Benjamin are here with me. I was proud to serve in the United States Army for almost 15 years, and then came to Texas, had a great job, everything was working really well, and then the bottom hit, and it hit hard, and it hit fast. And no matter how strong you think you are, no matter what kind of support system you think you have in place, it all fell out on me, everything. The only thing I had was my wife that still loved me. So I came from that kind of environment, and because I was a veteran, I was able to get connected with the Catholic Charities organization, and I met my first angel, and her name is Kim Wagner Hudson. I'm not sure if she's here, but she was an angel, and I'm just really grateful to be here, and it's a real pleasure to meet you two ladies.
David, thank you, and that raises a question that I want to come to. Was there a particular person or thought or dream or some key ingredient that helped get you moving?
For me, it was my fiance. I just got engaged for Christmas. It was the fact that I was not going to end up homeless, and that just was not going to be an option for me. God has been there every step of the way. But actually, there was one other person that stepped in, and that was when I got my job, I got it through a temp agency. The person that got me the job realized that my bottom kind of fell out. She started giving me rides back and forth to work. She made sure I kept that job going. So just everybody stepping in and helping out made a big difference.
How about for you, Danae?
My influence was definitely the people that came before me in my life, such as my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother came
And
to...
your mother here?
Yes, she's here. My grandmother came to America in the mid-'80s to, basically get a better life. And my grandmother, my mother, since they were foreigners, my mother was kind of fed the idea that because she is not an American, that she wouldn't have necessarily like the same rights that born-bred Americans do have. So that mentality kind of held her back for several years into not necessarily going as far as she could have in her earlier years in her life. So I feel it is my duty as being born and raised here that I should be able to do better than they were, since I have, I guess, better opportunities. So just wanting to make them proud is definitely what helped me to want to do better in my life.
David?
We were living in a hotel room, and that was me and my wife, my daughter and my 2 sons. And that's all we had. And my wife would look at me and she would go, "This is where hope goes to die, because you get there and it's a struggle just to survive." I'm sorry. It's a struggle just to survive. And I couldn't die. My wife wouldn't let me die there. Catholic Charities wouldn't let me die there. And they gave me the strength to keep on going. And we partnered together, Kim and the programs. And she'd say, "Dave, you've got to do this." And Dave would do this. And Kim would go, "Dave, you've got to do this." And Dave would do this. And I'd go, "Kim, we've got to do this." And all of a sudden, we were a partnership. And we did it together. And she kept me moving, and I kept her moving. And together, one of those slides up there said, let's end poverty one family at a time. Well, they ended it with my family, and I want to do it for one more family, and one more family, and one more family.
So we have a lot of community leaders here and people involved in the community. How can the community take better care of those living in poverty?
I think care is the #1 word. It's not just throw money at it and make it go away. You have to step in and say, what really needs to happen? Do we need to create more jobs? Do we need to make sure that the food is there? The other thing I think that makes the biggest difference from dealing with poverty my whole life is that there's a difference between somebody who steps in and does it and looks at you like you'll never be as good as they are, versus someone who steps in and says, "You know what, you're just in a bad spot and you just need a little bit of help." So to be able to completely separate yourself from that judgment and never look at somebody else like they're any less than you are. When you deal with people in poverty, you've got to have that attitude. Otherwise, it's just as much it's just as painful for you to be helping them as for them to be in the poverty in the first place.
That's a great point, Mandy. Thank you. Danae?
I feel as a community, we can just simply be aware of what's going on around us and to be compassionate for one. I feel like a lot of times people can be cold towards people who are in these kind of dire situations in their lives. And I feel like a lot of times we tend to put poverty with the face as the person that's on the street or sleeping underneath a bridge, but sometimes it may not be that case. It can be somebody who may look like it looks nice and pretty on the outside, but we never truly know until we get to talk to that person, get to know their story, and realize that sometimes poverty isn't even just always only financial, it can also be a mental state of mind. And I feel that if we help people in every single area of their life, we can help to make a really long-lasting impact.
David, how can we as a community do a better job?
I remember one time when my wife went to a food bank, and my wife was a very beautiful lady, and her nails were done, and she went to this food bank, and they turned her away. And they turned her away because her nails were done. And they said, "You don't look like you're poor." And we didn't have any food. We didn't have any food. And they turned her away because her nails were done. That was a big statement to me. One other time we went to a food bank, and they gave us a frozen chicken. That was great, except we didn't have a refrigerator. We didn't have an oven. We just had a stove with one frying pan. So I guess what I want to say is that organizations like Catholic Charities, they've been doing this for a while. They kind of know what to do. And they ask a lot of questions. And they get a lot of answers. And sometimes they get them right. And I think if we just recognize that there's some places that are doing it really, really well, that we should kind of support that and kind of let that keep going, because it helps. It helps a lot.
So last question for the three of you. You've been absolutely spectacular. Thank you very much. But what is one thing or something that you wish more people knew about those living in poverty?
I think the number one thing I wish people would realize is that we don't choose this. It's something that I've suffered through in my life, and never something that was chosen. Even when you see people that are sitting back and doing absolutely nothing but collecting welfare, it's not because they chose it, it's because they gave up. If anybody had a choice, they would not choose to live this way.
Well, I feel like, for instance, if you ask a young child what do they want to be when they grow up, no child is ever going to say something negative. It's always going to be something along the lines of, oh, I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a police officer, something positive. No child will tell you, oh, I want to be poor when I grow up, I want to be homeless, I want to be struggling. Something happens in the course of someone's life that kind of changes the plans, or like a very negative turn of events that puts them in that situation that they're in. And some people honestly feel like there's no hope and there's no way out, especially if it's something that they've been suffering with for a long time, such as poverty. Poverty is I feel it's like a very negative disease almost that comes at you, and some people don't know the remedy for it. And I feel that people living in poverty, all they really need is just help and a lending hand, and just awareness that there is better for you out there, and where you are right now is not the end, and this is not like a death sentence for you. This is something that you can overcome, and you can outdo poverty. Poverty does not have to have you.
David?
Robert, one of your slides was really instrumental. It said 20%. And 20% is a great number. And if you count 10 people and 2 people were in poverty in this room, about all of you would now be in poverty. That's a pretty impressive statistic, I think. It could happen to anybody. If you look to your right or you look to your left, you've seen people that have been touched or experienced poverty at one time or another. It happens. We've got to stop it. We can. They stopped it with me and my family. I think if we work together and we do the right stuff and keep pushing forward, I think we can stop it. And we need to stop it.
So we've had really great testimonies here, and I want everyone to thank our guests who've done this great job. Really wonderful. Really wonderful. Terrific. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience and give them their chance, and we're staying right here because we're all in this together, 4 of us. So we've got mics looking for hands. There's one right back there.
Thank you all for the testimony. I have been of the opinion very often that, I don't think I need that, but thank you, that education played a great part in raising or helping people come out of poverty. Did you find, I know you're in school, and I don't know about you want to go back to school, I think you said, and I don't know about the gentleman's educational background, but do you think had you had a better education background, would it have made any difference in your situations or not?
I personally feel a lot of it, I guess, has to do with the individual's determination. Because some people, I feel like they do have a very good education, and unfortunately they don't do much with it once they leave school. And then there's other people who do have that great education, and then they use what they learn in school to apply it to their everyday life. So I kind of feel it depends on the person's will to want to use that education that they were given or not.
That was good. Hey, go ahead.
Oh, and for other people who was not blessed enough to have that great education, I do think it does play a huge part of it because I've been to schools that were amazing, and I've been to schools that were absolutely terrible. And unfortunately, I feel like the schools that are very terrible don't have any structure. So when they leave those schools, what are they going to do when they get to the real world? They don't have any real stability, I feel, and that's just going to have them lost. So I really honestly do feel that education is an extreme factor in, ending poverty or just, preventing it to begin with.
Mandy, do you want to add anything to that?
I do. I love the fact that you're asking that question because my mom, after spending 10 years working for Head Start, started working on her associate's degree because she wanted to be better. She wanted the better job. She wanted the higher income. The day she walked across the stage was a huge, proud day for us, but it didn't improve her situation at all. I have the blessing now, of course this is 20 years later, that we have resources in our work centers across the country, in our workforce investment boards across the country, that when you go to college, they're going to help you figure out if this is the job you want to do. Is it a marketable job? Is it something that when you graduate in 5 years, it's going to improve your situation? So I think that those opportunities are getting better, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Even when I found a job that I wanted to pursue and that would have that better option for me, it was a matter of getting into school and getting the educational opportunity that I needed to complete it. So it's getting there, you just gotta keep pushing.
I'm gonna, David, can I ask
Please,
you to
Rob,
offer
go right
something
ahead.
here, and then then you go?
Yeah,
break
absolutely.
up the order here.
Let's go.
Is that all right? So one of the big findings that has been occurring in not just in the groups that I've worked with is that there's not a sufficient matching or availability of post-high school programs that may lead to well-paying jobs that may not need a BA degree. And the fact that we sometimes have told the world that the key to success is a 4-year college degree may have sent people down a path that wasn't really what they wanted or what was best for them. So one of the emphases on that I think is needed is a greater focus on post-high school, but not necessarily 4 years. And another emphasis is pre-K. But I think that there's great opportunity in community colleges and vocational education programs and apprenticeships to help people fill the demands of the labor market that are going unfilled because we're not helping people get the skills they need for those jobs, which might not require a 4-year degree. Anything you want to add?
I think that was an awesome question. Education to me is extremely important, and it's extremely important to my family as well. My daughter's in pre-AP classes, my sons are in pre-AP classes, they're AB honor roll. We really believe that education is important to keep us going forward. And I'll tell you, I think that education can help you and not hurt you. Can it always help you? Maybe not, to Robert's credit. But I don't think it's going to hurt you. And anything that you can add to your toolbox that's going to help, I think is a great, great thing to do. I think that was an awesome question.
Thank you all for being here, and God bless you, and keep on your way. Thank you very much.
Other question? Let's see, you guys, it's hard to see, but there's one.
Okay. Thank you first for your testimony. It was very, and also for allowing me to ask a question. My question to you is, we do not have a lot of public transportation for people who are needing to get to work who do not have or own cars. My question is, how important would public transportation have been for you to be successful? Thank you.
I think I've already mentioned how important it would have been. I was blessed enough to have people around to help me get back and forth to work. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be working. I'd be homeless. There's no option to it. One of the bigger things that I've seen since I have gotten back to work, back to transportation, is that I'm helping a lot of other people with rides because there's still not enough.
Yeah, the public transportation is so important in areas where the job situation could be anywhere. The Catholic Charities, to its credit, and this is true in other places around the country as well, has not waited for the creation of a public bus system or a public subway or rail system. They've just stepped in and provided rides. And actually, it can be a very efficient and effective way of meeting a demand in a targeted way without waiting for this global solution that solves it for everybody. We had a policy in the programs that I ran where we were very generous with bus fare and car fare for people because if you can't get to the job, you can't do the job. And so I think it is a very key ingredient to these difficulties. Right here.
Somebody mentioned the mindset of poverty, and I know if you can't get to work, transportation is important. But could you talk a little bit about the importance of possibly emotional support and just simply convincing people that yes, you can get out of poverty? How important is that? How does that need to be done?
Can we pass that to him?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody talked about the importance of the mindset of poverty and escaping, I guess, that mindset. Can you talk a little bit about how important it was for people to actually convince you that you could get out of poverty and how much emotional support is necessary to make that transition?
Well, I personally believe, as we all know, what you think is what you eventually become. If you feel that you are not worthy of much in life, more than likely you're not going to want to actually go out and achieve much. A lot of people, unfortunately, come from extremely, abusive backgrounds or, very terrible conditions, and some people just don't know any better. Some people, they've never seen, I guess, the bright side or the end of the tunnel. So I think it's extremely imperative that we help these people because it all starts with the mind at the end of the day. These people need to understand that they're worth so much more and that they're loved and they're cherished. And for me personally, it was just knowing my worth and knowing who I am through God, through the eyes of God. That is the number one thing that helped me personally. And I just think that knowing who you are, knowing your worth, knowing that you are loved and cherished is kind of like the stepping stone and the building block to actually, bring about some real positive change to your life. Because you can have a lot of money, but if you don't know the value of $1, if you don't know how much you're worth, it can all go down the drain and you're going to still be back to where you were at day one. So just changing your mind to a more positive aspect and being optimistic about life in general can really, truly help somebody who's desperately in need.
Do either of you want to comment on that?
I don't know. I hope that elaborated.
That was beautiful.
I'm sorry.
Go
ahead, David.
Beautiful.
Danae said something earlier
Yeah.
when we were rehearsing this, and we got together before we all came out here, and we, supported each other in a little prayer. And she said something that just was really powerful to me. And she says, if I put God first, I'll never be last. And to answer to your question, is emotional support important? Yeah, emotional support is very important. Without my family, I wouldn't be here. But spiritual support is also really, really important, because I think you kind of need all of that mix to keep it all together. And I think what you said was really important.
So I'm going to pipe in a little bit on this. This emotional support and sort of commitment and cheerleading is much harder to do by a government agency. So I just want you to know that. And I'm from the government, so I know that. This kind of assistance is much more likely to occur in a not-for-profit or community-based group. At least, now that doesn't mean there aren't wonderful government agency employees who take on cases and really do outstanding work helping people get there, but it's just much, much harder. Now, having said that, one of the lessons of the 96 bill, the welfare reform legislation, was not that the government agencies did a better job. It was that in asking people to step up and move toward work, we discovered they could and they would. They were the real heroes. It was the labor force participation for never married mothers went from 50% to 70%. And they didn't do it because caseworkers held their hands. It's that they, faced with an environment that said, you are an asset we want to love and cherish, and you can do something, they did it, as opposed to being treated like a liability or somebody we have to manage and protect. So I do think government agencies are weak, but they send messages, and if the message is, you can do it, that helps, I think.
One thing that a lot of people don't know when I first came down here was within a month of moving to Fort Worth, my mother passed away in Michigan. Not having the job, there was no way I could go home for her funeral. My sisters were not only having to deal with that, but they were having to help me out and provide the charity that I needed. About a week after she died was the interview for the job I have now. That's a lot to take on. And if I didn't have the emotional support, it would have never happened.
Okay, we have something over here. Where's the mic?
I was just going to say thank you all for demonstrating your faith today and giving us the blessing of your presence. As you think through what your next step is, all your great goals that you've got ahead of you, what can we do to help you get through that next barrier? Because we are partners with Catholic Charities, and we want to hear what it is that you need to get even better.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, the question actually, the question was, what more can we do for you? What more do you need to get to the next level?
Oh, you guys are awesome. First off, you guys are awesome for being here, giving up your night tonight to be here. You guys are awesome. You're doing what needs to be done. You're trying. That's a lot better than some people are doing. What more needs to be done? Well, I learned a lot from you tonight.
Oh, no,
you know, I mean, I saw those slides, and yes, he says that. Robert goes, oh, these are the experts. Okay, we are experts because we experience it at a certain level. But he showed me some things there that I wasn't aware of before. Education is important. Two-parent family is important. Catholic Charities is important because when I was working with Kim and Kim was working with me, she was listening to me and not just dictating to me. We were working together to get us out of poverty instead of me do all the work and she hand it out. It wasn't like that. With Kim, she was working with me. She understood that, I was a veteran and I had, some issues that I had to overcome, and that there were issues that we had to do together, and there were some issues that I had to do myself. And what Kim did is she listened and she put together different things for me to do, and she put different things together for Belinda and I to do so that we would be successful coming out of poverty. Because it's one thing to someone buy you a dinner and get you out of poverty for a night, and then the next night you're back in poverty. And unless you know what to do, I just don't want to think about going back there, you know? And she gave me the tools to keep going. And I think it's important for organizations like this and Catholic Charities and the counselors that they understand that it is a partnership, that it's not a one-way street. And Kim was the kind of person that really, really understood that. She understood what it was like to partner with somebody, and she accepted the fact that I knew certain things from my experiences, and she knew certain things from her experiences, and together we put together a working program that got us out of poverty. So,
Do you guys want to add anything?
The only thing that I can personally say for what you guys can do to help us more is, I guess, just to not give up on us. And that's something that you guys clearly have not done. You guys have taken so much initiative to make sure that, you know, we as a whole get back on our feet, because I feel like, you know, everything that, all the time and all the hours that you guys have put in dedicating to making sure that we can lessen this problem as much as possible has been enough. So, I mean, just keep on doing what you guys are already doing. It's fantastic. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm really, that was wonderful. One way of interpreting what you all said is the way you can help us is help the ones behind us, is keep helping. That they had reached a certain level. They're not asking for much more, except that you keep at it for people who are not doing as well as they are. And I think that's what I would say.
Education is a big deal. Being somebody who's lived with it my whole life, I dare say the richer I get, but the higher my personal income level gets, the more I realize I have to behave in a different way. I have to learn how to deal with, instead of scraping for pennies, when do I start a savings account? How do I manage those things? I've been promoted twice at work. So how do I carry myself in a different way instead of being that person that's always been in poverty? So you do what you can to get somebody out of that. To keep them out, you need to train them to not be that person anymore. And that comes through education.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to have one more question. There's a gentleman right here in the third row who's been patiently waiting. And I'm sure there were many others, but...
So I had just two quick questions, and not really for the panel, but in some of your comments you said that Medicaid cost $400 billion a year, but one of the main reasons people fall into poverty is because of health situations that they don't have coverage for.
Yeah.
So, you know, how do you, I don't say you balance the two, because obviously, you know, people that are poor should have access to some health care in order to have the ability to go to a job or go to school, things like that. So do you have a kind of a solution for that? Or?
Yeah, I'm a believer in providing health care coverage to low-income Americans. In New York City, even before the president passed his legislation, we had achieved an uninsured rate of 5% for children in New York City, which is virtual universal coverage. So when I talk about the imbalance in spending on Medicaid, it's not because I don't like the idea of doing it. It's just that it, on a per capita basis and on a draw on the taxpayer, it's just that much bigger. And I want to keep doing it. I want to do it I want to find ways to do it in a way that's more efficient and more cost effective. That's really all I was saying. Certainly health care is important, and health insurance gives people the security to be comfortable in work if their employer is not providing it, and it gives them the security to know that if their children get sick, that they can see a doctor and get care. That's very, very important. But it's just a fact about our anti-poverty efforts that it is a large component that isn't often recognized.
The second question, just real quick, is I would love to understand what the AI's kind of perspective is on a living wage. So, you know, one of the companies I worked for at the headquarter level, most of the people that worked for it was for fast food, $7.25 an hour, right? And most people, they might get a raise here and there, but it's a $7.75 or $8. And I think our average wage was, maybe $8.50, $9 an hour, which equates on a 2,000-hour year that you're working is, anywhere between $14,000 and $18,000. And so you have people that end up working multiple jobs just to try to stay, out of poverty or just above poverty. Mm-hmm. But then that also has the effect of, stress on a marriage if you are married.
Yep.
And, paying attention to your kids, raising your kids. And so you look at those, rates of poverty that have gone up, so it used to be in the 60s, we had, one person could go to work and pay,
Yeah.
right? And so someone else could stay at home, you could do it. Now you can't. It's virtually impossible.
Well, first of all, AEI does not have an official position. We have scholars who have their independent own positions. I am deeply worried about mandated higher wages, certainly $15 or $12 or even $10 on a nationwide basis, because people will lose jobs. There is job loss involved in every imposition of a government mandate that makes it harder for employers to hire people. The other thing is that many people who earn minimum wage are second earners in a household, are students, and you're not necessarily addressing the population that's living in poverty when you increase the mandated minimum wage. And then finally, as I mentioned, what we decided to do, bipartisan for 20 years ago, was we decided to provide assistance to low-wage workers in various other forms. So when we talk about the total resources in the household in an annual basis, for instance, a single parent with 2 kids, and you then say, and their wage is $9, and so that's all there is available to them, that's not actually being entirely accurate, because we decided as a country that household should also receive a tax credit at the end of the year of about $5,000, be eligible for food assistance in the food stamp benefits, perhaps get public health insurance. And so it's not exactly true that the wage alone is providing the resources to the household. And finally, when we make it all about a higher wage, we've decided that employers have to carry the full burden of assisting people who are working at the bottom of the wage scale. And the other way of doing it transfers that burden to all of us. It says we all ought to pitch in, and we also don't want to lose the jobs. So it's a contentious issue, and there's a national debate about it, and on the polling, this demand for higher wages. But I will say, in New York City, a mandated minimum wage of $12 or $13 is going to result in poor New Yorkers losing their job, and then they certainly will be poor. Thank you all very much. You were great. You were great. Renee, thank you very much.
I hope, if anything, you understand more tonight of how complex this issue of poverty is. I hope you were able to see from our 3 heroes who share their story that it wasn't just one thing, and that they all needed different things. And in many cases, they all needed somebody to do life with them, to walk alongside them as they were on their plight out of poverty. And then I hope beyond them, you also heard Robert explain that we can't just also look at the individuals, but we've got to understand the policy and the systems and the things that have been developed in our countries that impact all those things. So what we're trying to do, bottom line, at Catholic Charities Fort Worth, when we say end poverty one family at a time, it's a complex challenge. And it's going to be tough, and it's going to be a struggle, and we're going to learn a lot. We're probably going to fail a lot. But we cannot do this work without you. We cannot do this work without you all. It takes all of us joining together to really get to that level that we want to see happen in this community, where we're saying we're done with you poverty, one family at a time. So, it's important to me, two things as we sum up tonight. The first thing is, I think it's good to be educated, but I also think it's important to be called to action. And so tonight we're going to call you to action in a really simple way, and don't worry, it has nothing to do with a checkbook. How we want to call you to action tonight is by raising your hand, not literally, but responding to an email that you'll get from us today, later tonight, tomorrow, that asks you to serve as a Catholic Charities ambassador. And all that means is that you will commit to bring 10 people you know out to Catholic Charities to understand about this movement that we are trying to do to really end poverty with the families we serve. That, for us, spreading the word, engaging more people in our mission to end poverty, will go a long way for our organization. So that's my request. My second request of you tonight is to not just get up and leave. We have drinks, we have hors d'oeuvres, and we most importantly have conversation cards at the drink tables upstairs to allow us as a group, as a body, to continue to be talking about what we are doing to end poverty, what we've learned tonight, and to continue to reflect and share with one another. So I invite you to join myself and our panel upstairs so we can spend more time talking about this important issue. Thank you so much for being with us.